Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Cults and the Culting of America. And welcome if you are new. I am Daniela, also known as the Knitting Cult Lady, because I'm always knitting and I talk a lot about cults. I'm the author of Uncultured, a memoir about growing up in the Children of God and going into the cult of the United States Army. And we don't have Scott here today with us, which is why you're getting my voice and not Scott's beautiful baritone radio voice. But I do have another very exciting guest, Lucas. And I have been doing a little film consulting on the side. Lucas is directing right now what I think is going to be an extremely phenomenal movie called Holy Water. I describe it as 12 Angry Men meets Uncultured, but I am now going to give it to Lucas to tell us about him and this movie.
G'day, Daniela. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here and to talk about Holy Water. Been following you on Instagram and TikTok for a while now. Love your content, love your book, and it's been a pleasure to work with you to consult on this film. So, Holy Water was inspired, yes, by you could say by 12 Angry Men, which is a film about a jury, but also it was inspired by Jim Jones, who, as pretty much I'm sure everybody listening knows, is about Jim Jones was a cult leader in Jonestown in South America. He incited hundreds and hundreds of people to drink cyanide, which is where the expression drink the Kool-Aid comes from, because cyanide mixed with Kool-Aid, and kill themselves. And the reason was that Jim Jones gave was because they had reached the end of basically what life was meant to on earth, and so they now needed to enter into heaven, and that inspired Holy Water. So Holy Water is set inside a jury room. It's primarily set in a jury room, and what this jury is doing is deliberating the guilt of a religious cult leader. And this cult leader incited a mass suicide of his followers, and the jury are trying to figure out whether or not this guy is guilty or not. Did he incite a suicide, or did the cult willingly kill themselves? Because obviously, in Australia at least, suicide is not a crime. Inciting suicide is a crime. And so the jury are left for the first at least 15 to 20 minutes of the film just deliberating whether or not did these individual cult members have free will? Did they willingly take the glass, drink the cyanide, allow the cyanide to burn their insides, and ultimately collapse into a spectacle of death? Or were they forced to? Or were they somehow controlled and persuaded to do so by a guy who is effectively a beacon of charisma and a beacon of what is really deceit and manipulation, and get these guys to do it? And so that discussion sort of dominates, I suppose, the first 15 to 20 minutes of the movie. And it's supposed to explore a concept that Daniela, you taught me about, which is called bounded choice, where people do have a choice to do certain things, but really it wasn't their own, mainly because they were deceived into believing that what they were doing was their choice. And so this sort of discussion happens with amongst the jury as well. Things
And
take a little bit of a turn.
Lucas,
Sorry, Daniela.
just as you were saying that description, it got me thinking like, oh, it's like putting the concept they're free to leave anytime
Yeah,
to the legal test,
that's
right?
right.
Like, were they really free to leave?
Were they free to leave? That's right. And bit of background myself. Full time, I'm a lawyer. I don't do criminal law. I've never had a cult leader as a client. Imagine that. I've never had a cult survivor as a client. Yeah, putting legal tests, applying legal tests to extreme scenarios like this is always fascinating, because obviously, uh, in Queensland, which is for those who don't know, is a state in Australia. There's a little small town called Toowoomba, and right now there is a trial going on of an entire cult, not just the cult leader, but the entire cult. And so what happened was a little girl in this cult. Um, she was diabetic, and the cult refused to administer her medication because they believed that God would take care of it all. And so this little girl passed away, unfortunately. And now the entire cult is on trial for, I think it's murder, um, which at the same time I think is a little bit unfair because the cult leader should be the one in the spotlight, not the entire cult. And then again, I don't know the exact dynamics of how it all went down. I don't know exactly, the circumstances that led up to this little girl's death, but based on research of cults and listening to you, Daniela, I mean, the buck's got to stop somewhere, and the buck stops with that charismatic and deceitful leader. And so this film, the cult leader, his name is James Jenkins, which is obviously a little bit of a nod, or maybe not a little bit, but a lot of a nod to Jim Jones. And James Jenkins, the guy who plays him is this very, very charismatic Italian man, very handsome Italian man, and with the suave Italian accent, and he just has this incredibly powerful screen presence that makes me want to join him and follow him and do what he says. He plays this cult leader exceptionally well, and he's been doing a lot of research himself on how these cult leaders stand up, how they move their arms, how they look at people in the eye. He's got this sort of evil look in his eye as he's looking at his survivors, and every time he smiles at them, he's got this interesting way of smiling where he's smiling at his members, but really he's smiling at himself at the same time as he's doing it. And the way that he manages to pull that off, you see pictures of people like Jim Jones and David Koresh and stuff, and they're all smiling at themselves. These people, they're all incredible narcissists, and so this guy James Jenkins, he's on trial, and what is sort of like the oh my god moment of the movie is that one of the jury members insists that this guy is innocent. He insists that actually no, it wasn't free. It was free will. Everybody killed themselves willingly. But the thing is, he's insistent to the point where he takes his jacket off. He reveals that he's got a bomb strapped to his chest, and he says, "If you do not vote to set this man free, then I will kill all of you." And the jury's just thinking, what the absolute hell's going on here? We're all going to die. And so it immediately becomes sort of like a thriller type of movie because we're in this incredibly confined space. And this guy with a bomb strapped to his chest is threatening them all with death unless they vote for an outcome that's obviously not true because the evidence is overwhelmingly against this cult leader. And then as we go on, we learn that actually this guy with a bomb strapped to his chest, he's not all he claims to be. He's actually a survivor of the mass suicide himself. And so we learn throughout the film that he's actually managed to manipulate his way onto this jury and try and get his cult leader off. And sort of, I'm not going to spoil the movie, but it's an exploration about cult survivors and sort of the psychological perils that they put themselves through, because we learned that this cult survivor, he's not actually, a whack job. He's been manipulated, and the jury, their job is to sort of tease it out of him. And so what the jury do is they look at the evidence. They look at the evidence before them. They look at all the bundles. They look at the written records of what happened in the cult. They look at the photographs of the cult, and they sort of put together the picture that this man with a bomb strapped to his chest, well, he was actually a victim too. He was a victim of this James Jenkins fellow, this Jim Jones-esque character. And so what these guys have to do is they've got to sort of talk this guy down in language that he understands. So there's this one particular jury member who tries to, I guess, talk him down in a way that, I suppose, somebody who's not familiar with all the language and not familiar with how cult survivors think would try to, which is basically, you're in a cult. You were brainwashed, buddy. You were a whack job who believed in absolute garbage, and you were brainwashed by a man who was trying to trick you into everything. And this cult survivor is saying, no, we weren't in a cult. We thought we were doing what was best for us. We thought we were doing what was best for God. We thought we were doing what was best for humanity. And obviously that doesn't work out very well. They don't manage to sort of, put him down that way. So the jury are left to think, how the hell are we supposed to do this? How the hell are we supposed to get this guy to stand down? And it's not until one of the jury members does some digging and discovers that actually this guy went through something very, very specific in this cult, which is motivating him to do what he's doing now. He's not actually a whack job. He's not actually brainwashed. He's just hurt, and he's suffering from grief and trauma. And I'm not going to spoil why, but that's sort of like the concepts that I'm trying to explore in this film. And and I think the actors who we just completed one film shoot, which is all the flashbacks of this guy's life in the cult, in this chapel, out in Western Sydney. There's a lady out there who's not religious, and she owns a chapel, and she just rents it out basically to anyone who pays, weddings, film shoots, etc. And we managed to get our hands on that chapel and film the mass suicide. We filmed a couple of I think, Danielle, the term you used was degradation ceremonies. So
Mm-hmm.
as we're exploring what this cult is like, we learned that James Jenkins, anybody who sort of went against the grain, anyone who sort of went against his doctrine, went against his mantras, they were forced to kneel down, and get punched 7 times, because 7 is the holy number. And so they would all have to sit down, all be publicly slapped first, and then punched 7 times. And so we've got this great special effects makeup artist who applied blood to these cult members' faces and these bruising to this members' faces, and um, and that sort of just depicts, like, people are willing to go through this. People are willing to put themselves through pain. They're willing to put themselves through humiliation. They're willing to put themselves through absolute terror, because this cult leader has manipulated them into believing that what you should feel is more important than how you actually feel. And these guys, 12 of them, there are 12 cult members because it's supposed to be reflective of 12 disciples. Um, they all believed it, and this concept of doctrine over person, what you should feel is more important than what you actually feel, was directly inspired by my mother. So my mother was a survivor of I still don't like to use cult to describe it, but she was a survivor of some sort of religious community in the outback, basically in the bush in Australia in the 1970s. And they called themselves the Universal Brotherhood of Man. And they believed in some sort of strange combination between ufology and Christianity and some sort of spiritualism. I'm not sure what it was. But they kind of believed that, UFOs would come down and rescue them. They all believed in God. They all sort of, they weren't allowed to really talk to people outside. They were supposed to, grow their own food. They sang songs together. They all lived in a very, very isolated community out in the middle of nowhere in Western Australia. And it was my mum's life. When she was 18, she joined because, basically, she didn't know what else to do with her life. She wasn't brainwashed or anything. She was honestly just, I guess, ripe for the picking. She was just a sweet,
Mm-hmm.
innocent 18-year-old girl who met a very, very charismatic man who she's ironically still friends with today. Um,
Wow.
and a very charismatic man who convinced her to join. And so she left everything, and then she went to the middle of the bush and joined this community. And she grew up. She was there for about 5 years. And there was one particular moment where one of her friend's babies passed away. I think some sort of sickness, and my mum couldn't stop crying at the death of this baby. And the one of I suppose the leaders of this community came up to her and said, "Why on earth are you crying? You have no right to cry. This baby has gone to heaven now. You shouldn't be crying. You should be happy about this." And then and effectively humiliated her and making her feel that you know this isn't the right thing to do. You have to be celebrating the death of this baby. And this sort of stuff happened all the time. There was another story of another woman who was she was she I'm not sure exactly why, but she was put on what they called a silence fast. Very 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 the loaded language in the term silence fast is obvious, but what they would do is they would basically forbid her from speaking to anybody, and and they did that while she was pregnant, and at the same time separated her from her husband, probably for doing something not that bad. But this particular woman was a bit outspoken, and she probably said something that irked someone the wrong way. And so, they use these terms like "you're out of the consciousness." Um, they said things like "you need to go on a silence fast." They say things like, they had all these particular terms that, is obviously emblematic of a cult. This loaded language, and so, words like sinner, words like, um, you know, I think. To David Koresh, something referred to something as like this the third the seventh seal, directly from the
Yep.
Bible. And so in my film, James Jenkins, he creates the concept of the divine seal, which is basically a seal that protects his community from the rest of the outside world. And if you breach the divine seal, then you must be cleansed. And so this cleansing takes part of a ritualistic beating, 7 times, to the point almost where these guys pass out. And there's a particular scene that I've depicted in the mass suicide, which is again directly inspired from Jonestown, which is where, in Jonestown, where over 900 people incited, well, over 900 people drank the Kool-Aid and killed themselves. I mean, I would be surprised if a majority of them just didn't want to go through with it, because obviously they do have free will and they don't want to die. And those who didn't want to kill themselves were murdered, whether that was by
Right.
shooting or forcing the cyanide down
Well,
them.
there's so many interesting dynamics at Jonestown, right? One is absolutely what you said. Like, if they didn't do it, they were surrounded by people with guns, right?
Mm.
Like, they were going to be murdered.
Yeah.
But first of all, right, Jim Jones would practice this, right? They would practice these. They called them white knights, and he
Oh
held them
yeah.
over and over again. And he would make them drink Kool-Aid and then be like, ah, this was just a drill,
Yeah.
right? So they have literally been terrorized into this.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to describe it other than with a military deployment when you show up to deploy and then they send you home because the plane's not ready. And then you show up the next day and you're ready to deploy and they send you home. And by
Yeah.
the fifth day, you are like, get me out of here. Send me to that war because it's
Yeah.
just so kind of like messing with your emotions.
It's-
But the most significant thing is he had all of the parents kill their children first,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so then you're really going to do it, right? Like, no matter how much you don't want to, no matter how much you might be waking up in the moment, like, that's the pain of cognitive dissonance,
Yeah. That's right.
right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we definitely always try to refer to it as like a murder suicide and be
Yeah.
very compassionate. And it really strikes me when you're talking, I mean, especially now that you've told me the backstory with your mom, because I always felt like you handled this like in a very compassionate way.
Mm.
And everything you listed, that was like 100% cult stuff, right? Like we called it silence restriction in the
Oh
Children of
God.
God. They
Yeah.
would make us wear these signs that would say stuff like, don't talk to me, I'm disrespectful.
Nice.
So by the way, I put that in my book and now I put that phrase on a t-shirt and people love it.
Nice. Nice.
Um,
Nice.
but you know, you said something that like you didn't even want to call it a cult,
Yeah.
right? And then you proceeded to list like all of these things that you and me both know are culty.
Yeah.
And like this is not the hardball question yet. This is an easy question. But like why do you think we are so like reticent
Yeah.
to call something that we were involved with or someone that we love are involved with a cult?
I think it's because my mom has accepted that she was in a cult, but a lot of my family hasn't. And I don't want to call it a cult simply because if my family listens to this, they're not going to like me very much. Um, and they probably don't already, just me by making this movie, to be honest. But the, yeah, exactly. And I've actually, had dinner several times with the cult leader, and he's a really stock standard regular dude. I think he's suffered a lot too. He's realized the errors of his ways, and he's had to endure the national broadcaster of Australia, ABC. They did a they did a very compelling documentary on this community cult, and depicted this guy as a cult leader, and depicted, basically, you know, um, what the community slash cult was like. And that particular documentary, for a number of years, tore my family apart. Like, family members wouldn't speak to each other over it, and it became an incredibly sensitive issue. And so, even me referring to my mom now and talking about it, it's risky for me, because it's still a very, very sensitive subject in my family. And a lot of heartbreak and a lot of hurt has happened over this, which is sort of why I understand where cult survivors and cult members are coming from. I'm sure, Daniela, you yourself still get messages to this very day from Children of God survivors saying that you're a liar, and that what you're saying is not true, and that maybe it wasn't that bad, and that you're over exaggerating things, and all that sort of stuff. And members of my family say that still, that it wasn't that bad. And look, I'm sure it wasn't. I mean, compared to Jonestown, this particular community in the outback of the bush was totally benign. Um, well, I wouldn't say benign, but
But that's
yeah,
kind of, I think that's the kind of quick jump to thinking that everyone has,
yeah,
right? It's like, okay, we all understand now that cults are bad, but people have this hierarchy in their mind that, like, if it's not like Jonestown,
yeah,
then it's really not that bad,
yeah,
right? And by the way, we have this same thing in the military. Like, because the
mm,
wars we fight now are not like Vietnam, then what are you complaining about?
exactly,
You
exactly.
know, and one of the things about going through really hard things together, traumatic things together,
Mm,
is we tell ourselves and we tell other people, like, it's really not that bad,
mm,
right? Like, and that's also part of why we bond so hard with that team. Like, just imagine like the Eras tour right now, Taylor Swift's tour, right? Like, they're telling themselves this is not that crazy. This crazy tour that they set out to do all over the world.
yeah,
But like when this is done, they're going to be bonded forever. And they're going to
exactly.
look back at it and go, whoa, that was really crazy. Like, that was a crazy thing that we did.
Yeah,
And I think this is actually a really significant moment in the deconstruction for people in cults. I think this is actually kind of what begins it often, is when you find another cult survivor. Sometimes it's people finding me and my videos talking about it, or you find a work of literature, or like some tangible artifact from the cult that you can go, like, it really was that bad. And
yeah,
honestly, one of the things I think is that this is so formulaic, right? That's why you could write an almost perfect cult.
yeah,
And which to me means that, like, when I say cults are on a spectrum, I kind of mean like you're 1 out of 10 on these 10 things that I have. But like, once you get all 10 of these and you are a closed off cult with the full ideology and everything, I just think it's a matter of time and money and power,
it's a
right?
slippery
Like, the
slope. Yeah,
Scientologists have become some of the worst because they've had the time and the money and the power. Um, but yeah, I kind of think any of these cults can become that. But where I actually want to go with this was the sensationalization, right? That like everybody is so afraid of. And no matter what you do, you're you're going to make somebody upset,
yeah,
right? And this was the hardball question, which is, so I feel like many cult survivors, if not most, like, we do not like to see depictions of cults on film
mm,
because it's just so dun dun dun, right? Like, it's just it it's almost like those memes you see of, like, when they're like, this is somebody's version of this who's never seen this,
mm,
right? And it's like, it's a person who's never been in a cult thinking about what they think is a cult
mm,
and trying to put it on the screen.
yeah,
But the reality is, and what I realized when I was working with your script, it's like, but you still have to have that, right? Because for film, right, you still have to have a soundtrack. and you're
course.
not going to play happy music, right? So you're gonna play ominous music, right? You're gonna have some of these kind of quick stereotype things, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone all in white. So the question is, and like I let me tell you, I had to ask myself this when I was writing Uncultured, right? And translating cult life onto the page and military life onto the page in language that my reader can understand. How much are you willing to compromise the cult survivors thinking your movie is sensationalized versus it just being easier for the audience to get? And what was like that balance like for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, yeah, in terms of, I wanted to create something that wasn't an insult and that wasn't something that would go, that would make, cult survivors sigh and think that my movie was just, another one of those ones that stereotype cults and stuff. And so that's why I engaged you, and I looked at and I spoke with him about four other survivors, because I wanted to create something that just struck that balance between still getting something that regular audiences could identify as a cult and something that would still resonate with actual survivors. And so I thought, rather than just literally depict a story of a man going through um, hell in a cult. Yeah, they wear blue jeans, they wear white shirts, they don't wear shoes. So yeah, I guess you could say that from an outsider's perspective, it's obviously culty, and that might some cult survivors might be like, oh, okay, but
Well, it even goes deeper into some things, right? Like if you choose a handsome man,
yeah,
right? The reality is most cult leaders in history have not been that handsome,
yeah,
right? That's not really part of the charisma,
yeah,
but their followers think that they are,
yeah. That's right.
right? Yeah. So you either go real life and put this like flubby cult leader on the scene and
Yeah,
then people don't get it,
yeah,
or you make him charming
yeah,
and attractive,
yeah.
right? But then cult survivors are like, yeah, but it's not like that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I understand that. Which is why when I cast this particular fellow, I asked you and I asked a bunch of others because I was really struggling with that because the other guy who auditioned for this James Jenkins role, much respect to him, but he's not exactly, a supermodel. He was a little bit, he was bald, he was, a bit shorter, and I guess you could say he looked like more like a normal guy. And I was wrestling with this, like, who do I choose? And I think the reason why I settled on this handsome, charismatic man, it probably was to strike that balance. Because people who haven't been in cults, or people who, um, I still struggle with this because the guy who was the cult leader in my mom's community was very gorgeous. He was a gorgeous dude, and he still is, even though he's like approaching 80 years old. He was a gorgeous dude, and me saying that as a completely straight man, much respect to this guy, for his looks and for his charisma and for his personality, and you just can't help but like him. And so I think that probably had a little bit to do with it because yeah, most famous cult leaders that we know wasn't handsome, but I mean David Koresh wasn't bad, physical wise, you know, um,
Right,
and
right.
and
And
so
I mean, I feel like I've noticed in my life someone I think is maybe not that attractive, and then I
yeah,
fall in love with them, and they are the most beautiful person to me,
yeah,
right? So I think like there's definitely that dynamic
yeah,
in a cult as well, and they can't separate it out. I mean, I remember the first time I saw pictures of David Berg, who started Children of God after he died,
yeah,
and I was like, he's literally an oily 75-year-old man.
yeah,
And meanwhile, our whole lives we've heard how beautiful and sexy he is.
yeah.
But in their heads, I mean, they believe that.
No, absolutely right. And it's when I was writing Holy Water, um, it was also inspired by a cult called the Order of Saint Charbel, which is they were based in Nowra, which is sort of near Wollongong in rural New South Wales. And the Order of Saint Charbel was run by this really short, stocky, kind of like uh, oily looking, 70-year-old dude. And he would basically like, he would write letters to the underage girls in his community and pretend that he was the Virgin Mary. And and he would write letters saying, like, sleep with this guy, sleep with him, sleep with him. And so he would systematically just have sex with underage girls, and he would tell them that the Virgin Mary told him to do that. And that sort of stuff. It was absolutely messed up. But I mean, I deliberately in my movie didn't want to go there. Like, I didn't want to choose sex. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want kids involved. These were just all adults. And I think the reason I did that was just to, as well, just emphasize the free will versus um, coercion thing. Because when you got kids involved, I mean, they're also heavily influenced by their parents, not just the cult leader. And I just wanted it to be adults. And
Right.
also, you have logistical issues working with kids on set as well. So it was
Oh,
just,
I get it. I
it
was
was,
a child actor in a cult.
no, there you go.
Um,
There you go.
and I
So
may have a little acting scene in this movie, huh?
you may, yes. There's in the montage
Um,
in the beginning of the film. Yes.
One thing that I wanted to say about this before we let you talk about your fundraiser, because I really
Mhm.
want you to do that. Um, I felt like this movie is and will be like it's so useful for the real question that everyone wants, which is how do I get my family member out of a cult, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do I get my friend or my family out?
Yeah.
And we don't have an answer for that, right? Like our best cult professionals, police, I mean, people study gangs, terrorist groups, right? All of these parallel things. It's like
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't
stay
recommend.
connected,
I wouldn't
right? Stay
recommend.
connected.
Yeah.
And I venture that this is because we buy into our own indoctrination, right? So it's really,
Yeah.
really hard to force the crack. And when I read your movie script, I was like, oh, he's saying, let's play that out, right?
Yeah.
Well, now you have to force the crack. Let's go. And then you're able to see, as you mentioned, like people try kind of the different ways.
That's right.
So while I hope like no watchers or listeners out there are like ever in a bomb hostage situation, it is useful, I think, to think through some of these scenarios, right? Like this is what my job was in the military was like, okay, what if it goes like this? Right? So maybe it's not a bomb, but maybe it's family Thanksgiving dinner, right? And someone stands up and says something really racist or really something in their cult, right? Like what do you do? How do you respond? And what are some of the ways that work?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't recommend strapping a bomb to your chest and going into a jury room. Might work for some, but I wouldn't recommend it. But that's right. I mean, I guess you could say being confronted at I could have easily made the movie just all set in a dining room over a family dinner. I could have done
Right.
that, but I just felt like having it in a jury room has that legalistic sort of element to it. With the intensity of a bomb, and these jury members they can't escape. At least with a family dinner, if Uncle Joe's being racist, you can just walk away. In this particular situation, you can't do that. So unless you want to die, and so they're really, really forced to tease into this guy and find that crack. And I don't want to spoil what this crack is, um, but uh, that's right. It's about finding that particular that emotional contradiction, I guess, and teasing it out of them so that they realize, what they've actually done. And the film visually explores that as well. There's a part where the main character hallucinates and he actually confronts his cult leader head on in the epic climactic battle, so to speak.
That, and that's really what the answer is. I think what people just don't like is that it takes a lot of time. And when
Yeah,
I said we don't know how to break somebody from a cult, that's not true. We do. We just don't know how to do it legally,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because there was this man, he called himself Black Lightning, Ted Patrick, who worked for Governor Reagan in California, and he made it his mission after Children of God tried to recruit his 14-year-old son to go, and he would literally kidnap people for their parents
yeah,
and get them out. And about 3 days, Stephen Hassan was out of the Moonies in kind of a similar way. About 3 days of complete separation and having people talk you down, like
yeah.
will break people from cults,
Yeah.
but we also don't recommend kidnapping on this
No, I mean
podcast.
that movie Split Image.
So,
I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a movie called Split Image, and what's his name? James Woods. He plays a cult deprogrammer, I guess, and he goes and kidnaps somebody out of the cult and tries to get them back to normal, so to speak. So yeah, it just reminded me of that.
yeah, and so, on the flip side, my other recommendation when people ask me is there's a book called Rising Out of Hatred, and it's about the heir of like the Aryan nation, white supremacy people who like his friends in college through 4 painstaking years of the most patience you can possibly imagine, like break him out of his ideology.
Yeah,
So, I mean, the real answer is like, you're going to have compassion. You're going to have to understand them. You're going to have to speak to them in a language they understand. And
yeah.
you're going to have to find a way to make that crack and then get in that crack and pull them back into reality. You just show this very well in a bite-sized movie by ramping up all that pressure. And I'm really happy with your script and your
Oh,
photos of filming. I'm
oh,
so
thank you,
excited to
thank
see
you.
it.
You were instrumental in
And
making it happen, of course.
I know that this is an independent film and you are an amazing artist out there like us, just making your art and trying to get it to the world. I would love to support. I would love for my listeners to know how to support. You have a GoFundMe.
Yes, I have a GoFundMe. It's in my Instagram bio. My Instagram is LH LHMOCTEZ. And in my bio, there's a link to my GoFundMe. Help me make a movie exposing religious cults. Um, all I need is, if 500 people just donated $20, then I would reach my fundraising goal immediately. And
Amazing.
yeah, because obviously it's self-funded. I don't really have any money. I'm using pretty much every cent I have into pouring it into this movie. Hiring filming locations, hiring crew, hiring cinematic quality cameras, gaffers, lighting, sound, all that sort of stuff. Costs money, and I don't have much of it. So, if any cent, I think 20, and that's 20 Australian dollars. So I think in US that's even less. That's all I'm asking for. Any cent would be a really really big help, so that I can just tell this story, of this man who is putting himself under extreme circumstances, and having a jury who have no idea, who have never been exposed to a cult survivor before, try and find that emotional contradiction, that crack, if you speak, to try and get this guy to realize what he's doing, and ultimately forcing him to metaphorically confront his cult leader head on, who has just been the victim, who has made him the victim of so much trauma and grief and betrayal that's going to haunt him for the rest of his life. And so any cent or any dollar that you contribute to my GoFundMe, everyone who's listening, I'd be incredibly grateful, just so that we can make this movie a reality.
Absolutely. And all of Lucas's information will be in the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, it will be in the links. If you're seeing a preview for this on social media, it is in my link tree. So 500 people, that's not too many. We are living right now, I'm not sure what you're going through in Australia, but in the US, we are going through the largest exodus of religion ever. They're calling it the Fourth Great Awakening.
Wow.
And like we just have so many people out here. It's actually funny because the cult scholars and activists of the 60s and 70s were like, never thought cults would be a trending topic. But here we are. Everyone is trying to understand it. We have some good documentaries. We have almost no films. So I really do think this movie you're making is going to be such a great boon to cult survivors and people that are trying to deconstruct. And I also feel like it's going to be a good sneak in movie for your relatives and people
Ooh.
like that. So this is like much the way I tell people sometimes to market Uncultured. I'm like, you can just tell them that it's a story about this girl who grew up in this really extreme cult and then she became a captain in the US Army.
Yeah.
And then like the book does the work. And
Yeah.
I think because sometimes when you give the most extreme story, right? When you stretch your art to the edges while staying real to the human relationships, people are going to recognize their own situations. And one of the things that we have found is the easiest way to get people to recognize coercive control in their own lives is to see it in parallel contexts. And I'm a scholar, I am a survivor, and I believe that it absolutely doesn't matter what label you put on a group. Like it really doesn't. We only really call something a cult when it's in the media. You know, right now we're going through Shen Yun, Falun Gong. They
Yeah.
just did a huge piece about it being a cult in the New York Times. And people have been knowing this, people have been saying it, right? But until the media decides it's a cult, it's a cult. But what I think the reality is when we make this art out of cult experiences, people are able to recognize that, right? Like
Right.
somebody is going to recognize the tone of voice that James Jenkins is talking in their pastor or their, this person leading their CrossFit gym. And they're going to be like, oh, I don't want
Yeah.
that. So yeah, I'm really excited and we're definitely going to try to help you spread it all over the US. Maybe we can get it into some of those film festivals. I don't know anything about this now.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Just
I'd
accept it.
love to. That'd be amazing if I could. It'd be a dream come true for sure. Yeah, but thanks so much for your help as well in getting the script. I was so surprised that you responded because it was just literally a cold email to your agent. Will you help me make this movie? And you were like, absolutely, we will. So that was a great collaboration.
Oh man. Yeah, and it's so funny. We never realize like people are just people on the other end, right?
That's
Meantime, me and
right.
my agent have been sitting here going, we need to get Daniela on as a film consultant. So
That's awesome.
things work out.
The actress, the main jury member, I guess the good jury member, Lizzie, her name is. You could say that she was semi-inspired by you, and because after reading your book, I was just like, okay, I'm going to create a character in this jury room who's a veteran, and who's a strong-willed individual. She doesn't do any knitting though. She doesn't do any knitting, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but I love it because it's even more. I mean, I'm very honored, of course, but it's even more like playing on stereotypes and all of the kinds of things that I like to do.
yeah.
Makes the movie a real thinker. Like I know you think it's a thriller, but to me, it's very, very deeply psychological, and I love
Yeah, no,
that
I
so
would call it a
much.
psychological drama, that's for sure. Originally, it was going to be a thriller. Originally, it had a scene where you know the jury, one of the other jury members was in on it, and he was going to poison the cyanide, and then he was going to get all the jury to drink the cyanide, and the jury would all die in a spectacle of death. But I thought that's a bit too much. I'm just gonna keep it on the topic of cults and psychology of cult survivors, and we'll just leave it at that. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's good. And plus, what I hear you saying is that when I go on like the Drew Barrymore show and I'm doing publicity for your movie, I can be like, yeah, well, the main character, she's based on.
Yeah, Sammy inspired me. I got her to buy your book as well, by the way. So she's reading it as we speak.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah,
Well, tell her if she ever wants to chat. I would definitely be down for that.
absolutely, absolutely.
And thank you so much for coming on here. It's will be a nice little break in between all of our very serious cult episodes
Oh
to
yes,
talk about this really fun, and when I say fun, I mean in all of the darkest senses, um, movie that Lucas is doing so well. Please, if you are listening to us on Spotify or iTunes, please give us a quick thumbs up, 5 stars if you will. You can leave words, you don't have to, but please only leave words if you like us. And thank you so much.
thank you so much, Daniel.
Have
I
a great night.
appreciate it.